I just want to say good morning. My name's Colin Edwards. I'm the associate pastor here and the student pastor here. And Pastor Dan's given me the honor of preaching this morning. I'm just so thankful. But before we get there, I wanted to take a minute and just share with the church a little bit of what's going on with our student ministry and what all's been happening in our students, because it's been really incredible. And it blows my mind to think Lauren and I have been here 8.5 months now. And I don't know where time's going. So I didn't say that so you would clap. I was just making mention of it. But we're so thankful for you guys and the way you've rallied around us, encouraged us. Many of you shoot us texts all the time. And I think the best way to say it is we're just thankful to be a part of the family here at Cornerstone and to be doing life with you guys. So we're thankful for that. There are several things we want to celebrate as far as our student ministry goes today. The first one, and maybe most importantly, is I'm like 150-0 in ping pong downstairs. And each kid thinks it's their night. It's never their night. And I have news for them. It's never going to be their night. Pastor Dan also thought it was going to be his day one time. It wasn't his day either. And he's Asian, so that's saying something right there. Sorry, man. Tough morning for him. He hasn't asked me to play in like a month, and I've just been sitting back waiting. I don't know if he's given up or if he's practicing behind closed doors. Ready, but no, it's been a ton of fun. I don't know if any of them will ever get the best of me, but we will see. We do seriously want to celebrate, though. Every Wednesday night, between 50 and 55 teenagers gather here from 6 to 8 p.m., and I don't know if I still have that picture or if it timed off. Yeah, that's just a picture of a little bit of kind of how Wednesday nights go here. I want to celebrate this, too. We've had 97 first-time guests in youth in 8.5 months. Isn't that wild? So we're so thankful for that. One of the first things we did when Lauren and I came was we assembled a youth leadership team, and they didn't know we were watching, but for the first 60 or so days, we were just trying to watch and figure out who the leaders were. And 8 of them quickly emerged, and they had to go through a rigorous process. They had to write me an essay. They had to fill out a questionnaire, send me 4 references, and have a one-on-one interview to actually get into this. And the reason for that, it needs to be a big deal because it is a big deal. And what that does is it weeds out anyone that's not fully in it. And all 8 of these incredible students jumped on board. And it's been just such a fun journey with them. I asked them, they came to our house on Tuesday night. And I asked them, we've been here 8.5 months, and we're just excited about the future. But in your words, what are you most thankful that God's doing? And I have a few of their quotes right here. One of them said, I'm just thankful for spiritual growth in myself. One of them said, I'm thankful that I'm growing in my understanding of the Word of God. One of them said, I'm thankful that I'm learning how to pray that we're learning how to pray for one another. One of them said, I see growth and boldness in myself. One of them said, I'm actually building stronger relationships. And then one of them said, we're building special memories together. And I just think that's awesome and worth celebrating that's happening in our student ministry here. We just finished what we called the Epic Challenge. And it was a 12-week challenge where we did games and dress-up things and just had a ton of fun. Kids were memorizing scripture. Kids are memorizing 66 books of the Bible in order. We had 2 kids even memorize entire chapters of the Bible. Just been incredible to see all of that happen. I have some numbers here just to celebrate that. 18 students it's the number that got in on memorizing scripture passages, and 7 of them actually memorized all 66 books in order. And so I'm thankful for that. I don't know, do y'all remember Awanas back in the day? Does anybody here remember? I memorized the books when I was like 8 years old, and it's still just like clockwork at how you can remember that 20 years later. And so I'm thankful that they are memorizing that. And then to celebrate just what all God's done we've done 7 series in 8 months, and we've had countless discipleship groups, and we're going to celebrate all of that. The 7 students that had the most points in the Epic Challenge, we're taking them on an all-expense paid trip to Denver, Colorado in January. So, yeah, it's going to be awesome. I tried to talk Pastor Dan into doing an Epic Challenge for the church so that y'all can go somewhere epic as well. I don't know where that is in the process, but no, we're excited about that. End of January, we're going, and just to honor them and celebrate that and reward their hard work. So we're looking forward to that. In 2025, we let the students know the other night, there's 2 big things that we're looking at putting in. One is we're launching a more in-depth discipleship group. This is not just the whole youth group, because when you have kids come on Wednesday night, some of them, if I'm just being frank, some of them just don't really care. They're just there to have a good time. But then you have your other ones who are really excited about diving deeper in the Lord. And I don't want to differentiate those 2 groups in a bad way. I'm thrilled all of them are here because God so in seeds and needs right here and he's going to do something special in their lives, and I'm thankful. But for these over here, I wanted to create an opportunity for them to really dive deeper. And so we've launched a discipleship group. We've had 18 students commit to a year of pretty intense discipleship. And so that's going to launch in January, and we're off to the races with that. That'll be probably 20 to 25 meetings that are 45 minutes to an hour long. And we're just full steam ahead, all in, and excited for all that's to come. And I wanted to I forgot to mention this as well. The second thing we're going to launch in 2025 is we're going to launch a youth leadership summit. And there's just so many. How many of you know leaders are not born, leaders are made? And so we've got to train leaders to actually become all that God's called them to be. And one of the ways we're going to do that is through a youth leadership summit, where the staff of our church and the leadership of our church helps actually identify students who are ready to go to that, and then gives them an opportunity to learn in a leadership space for a day or two, like an intensive type thing. And so that's coming in 2025 as well. And before I go to the word today, best of all, I want to celebrate this together. We've had 9 students give their lives to Jesus in 8 months. Can we celebrate that? So thankful. So thankful. So thank you for praying for us and praying for our student ministry. And it may sound cliche, I just believe the best is ahead. Yeah? And so we're so thankful for that. Let's go straight into the message today. We're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 17. If you want to flip over there with me, 1 Samuel 17. We'll have them on the screen. Some people may prefer to flip through a Bible, but we're going to be in 1 Samuel 17. We've been in a series as a youth group that it's been called One Big Story. And what we're seeing and what I've seen over the years is, honestly, I'm kind of blown away at how we're all familiar with some of the stories of the Bible, but we've never actually read them. We know Moses parted the sea, but how many of us have read the story? We know Jonah got swallowed by a big old fish, but how many of us have actually read the story? We know Daniel got stuck in a lion's den for 3 days, but how many of us have read the story? And so we've been talking through 7, I believe it's 8 now, of the Old Testament stories, and actually reading them through to see the messages. Even though the Old Testament's the Old Testament, there's still a ton of relevance in the Old Testament today, now that we understand what Jesus has done for us. And so today I want to take on one of those stories, and I want to preach to you my favorite story in the entire Bible, 1 Samuel 17. It's the story of David and Goliath. Are you ready? How many of you know the story of David and Goliath? Some of you may not. Yeah, awesome. Most have. I sat down with middle schoolers after sharing this, and I said, how many of you, that was the first time you've heard David and Goliath? And 3 7th graders raised their hand. And I'm just like, that's pretty wild, right? Because we're so acquainted with it. But there may be people in here today who have never heard that story, and I'm just excited to be able to share that with you. So 1 Samuel 17 is where we're going to be. I need to kind of set it up here in 1 Samuel 16 so that we can jump into 17. 1 Samuel 16, there's a king in Israel, and his name is Saul. All right, Saul is the first king of Israel, and Saul actually turned into rebellion. He became a rebellious king, and so the Lord was displeased with his king. And so the Lord actually sent Samuel, who was one of his prophets, to go and anoint another king because Saul's time was coming to an end. And God told Samuel, I need you to go to the house of Jesse. Jesse was a man who had 8 sons. And if you follow all the way down the line of Jesse's 8 sons, the last son's name is who? David. And so we see David kind of enter the story right there. Samuel goes to the house of Jesse, anoints David. You can go read this whole story for yourself. I'm just going to paraphrase it. Samuel goes to the house of Jesse, anoints David as king of Israel. He's 15 years old. Isn't that wild? Like, here's your learner's permit, and by the way, you're anointed king of Israel. That's pretty wild, right? So he's anointed king of Israel, but what's crazy about it is David's just in the field. Like, Jesse had to go get him from the field because he's a shepherd boy, and he's tending to the flock, taking care of the sheep, taking care of the field. And so they go get him, anoint him king of Israel, and it would actually be 15 years before he would actually become king. I don't have time to teach all of that right now, but he was anointed king at 15, but not appointed king until he was 30. And so there's a 15-year gap in that time frame right there. But David, being the youngest, was responsible for the fields. And there would be many times bears and lions would try and come and scoop up his sheep. And he'll tell the story here in a minute in 1 Samuel 17, but there's times David has to go and actually save his sheep from the mouth of a lion, and he rips the sheep out of the lion's mouth to save his life, and that's just what David did. But while he was doing that in the fields, David's older brothers, his 7 older brothers, were actually at war, and there's a war going on right here as we turn into 1 Samuel 17 between 2 people, 2 nations, the Philistines and the Israelites. And that brings us to 1 Samuel 17. Let's go on there, if we would. 1 Samuel 17, verse 1. The Philistines mustered their army for battle. And they camped between Soka and Judah and Azekah at Ephes Dammim. Verse 2. Saul countered by gathering his Israelite troops near the valley of Elah. Verse 3. So the Philistines and Israelites faced each other on opposite hills with the valley between them. Here's the setup right here. We have the Philistine army on one hillside. We have the Israelite army on the other hillside. And in this valley that goes between the two hills, it's called the Valley of Elah. We see the stage being set for a battle to take place. I actually have a picture. Anybody geography nerds in here? Okay, me and Aaron, we'll enjoy this together, right? This is a picture of the Valley of Elah. And so if you look at Soka up here and Azekah on the right, Soka, Azekah, the Philistines had slowly, over the past handful of years, even back to the days of Samson, had been slowly taking ground. And the Israelites are starting to get nervous because the Philistines are starting to approach the Israelite capital. And if they overtake the capital, then it's bad news for the Israelites. So this is a pretty desperate place for the Israelites. I think I have a picture of the Valley of Elah today, Blake, if you could throw that up there. That's actually a picture of what Elah looks like today in the Middle East, all right? So I just think that's cool. Aaron, did you enjoy that right there? Awesome. Loved it. So much so that you're just throwing stuff on the ground. Love it. So that kind of sets the stage here for the battle that's about to take place. Let's go into verse number 4, if we would. Then Goliath. Everybody shout Goliath. He's a Philistine champion from Gath. The word champion here doesn't just mean like, hey, he's a champion and that he's won a lot. A champion is someone, it's a word used to identify someone that represents their nation in combat. And so a lot of times you see, in these days especially, it wouldn't be tons of people versus tons of people in a battle. Each side would send a representative, and the winner of that one-on-one combat would be deemed the winner. So the Goliath is the Philistine champion. He came out of the Philistine ranks to face Israel. He was over 9 feet tall. Some people say 9'9". Now, I'm like 6'6", nearly. So add 3 feet and 3 inches on top of that. I should have brought a tape measure today. All right, my reach is about 8'4". Add another 1 and 2 inches on top of that. That would be Goliath's height. All right, verse 5, watch this. He wore a bronze helmet. His bronze coat of mail weighed 125 pounds. Verse 6. He also wore bronze leg armor. He carried his bronze javelin on his shoulder. Verse 7. The shaft of his spear was as heavy and thick as a weaver's beam, tipped with an iron spearhead. Watch this. That weighed 15 pounds. The tip of his spear weighed, you talk about being top heavy, right? Tip of his spear weighed 15 pounds. His armor bearer walked ahead of him carrying a shield. How many of you know this is no guy to be messed with? He's a champion. He's the one sent by the Philistines to represent the entire nation. In verse 8, Goliath starts to speak. He stood and he shouted a taunt across the Valley of Elah to the Israelites. And I just imagine how this deep voice began to reverberate throughout a valley. Why are you all coming out to fight, he called. I am the Philistine champion. You're the servants of Saul. Choose one man to come down here and fight me. What do you think the Israelites thought? Good, man, I'm good. Thanks for the invite, man, but I'm all right. Let's go to verse 9. Watch this. If the person you send kills me, then we'll be your slaves. But if I kill him, you will be our slaves. Verse 10. I defy the armies of Israel today. Send me a man who will fight me. Let's go ahead and read 11 while we're here. When Saul and the Israelites heard this, they were terrified. There's their response, right? What does Israel think as they hear this deep voice reverberate throughout the valley? They were terrified and they were deeply shaken. The scene is being set for something extraordinary to happen. Goliath comes forth to lift his voice. The Israelites want to have absolutely nothing to do with it. This right here is when David enters the story. Let's go to 14. David was the youngest son. His 3 oldest brothers stayed with Saul's army. Let's go to 15. But David went back and forth so he could help his father with the sheep in Bethlehem. We got to understand this. David's in the field tending to the flock. The brothers are fighting at the Valley of Elah. That journey was 15 miles. And you talk about being the little brother that gets stuck with the things that nobody else wants to do. David's responsibility was every time his dad said, hey, take some food to the battlefield. 15 miles on foot. Drop the food off, 15 miles back. Every time. This battle had been going on for years with the Philistine and the Israelite. Back and forth. Drop food off. See how things are going. Come back to the house of Jesse and let Jesse know how things were going. 15 miles on foot. Let's go to 16. For 40 days, This is a month and a half. This is a piece of the story that often gets missed. 40 days. That's now until January the 3rd. Goliath, the Philistine champion, strutted out in front of the Israelite army. You talk about being afraid, right? Because for a month and a half, the Goliath has stood forward and asked for a challenger, and the Israelites are good. Month and a half goes by. Let's go on to 17. One day, Jesse said to David, take this basket of roasted grain, these 10 loaves of bread, take them quickly to your brothers. How many of you want to go 15 miles quickly? None of us, right? Okay. Take them quickly to your brothers. That's wild to really think about. I even, for other geography nerds in here, maybe just Aaron and me, but 15 miles on foot is like here to Ohatchee, here to Alexandria, right? That if you want to go east or if you want to go south, that kind of gives us a picture of how far 15-ish miles are. In verse 20, David arrives at the Israelite camp. We'll come back to that in a minute. Would you go to verse 20 right there? 1 Samuel 17. I've got it here if not. 1 Samuel 17, verse 20, if you're following along. David actually left his sheep, watch this, with another shepherd. And he set out early the next morning with the gifts, just as his dad had told him. He arrived at the camp just as the Israelite army was leaving for the battlefield with shouts and victory cries. So here's what's happening. David's coming onto the scene. There's battle cries happening. Goliath is about to lift his voice, and he's just a kid that's bringing lunch to his brothers. And in verse 21, we see soon the Israelite and Philistine forces stood facing each other, army against army. 22, David left his things with the keeper of supplies, and he hurried out to the ranks to greet his brothers. Y'all kind of see the tension building? You see the suspense beginning to build. David's wondering, okay, man, this thing's about to go down. Goliath has been raising his voice. We go to 23. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the champion from Gath, came out from the Philistine ranks, and then David heard him. David walks on the scene, hears Goliath lift his voice and cry out and begin to defy the armies of the living God. 24, as soon as the Israelite army saw him, they actually ran away afraid. Can y'all get the picture this morning? We're about 3/4 of the way through the story right now. Goliath is lifting his voice. David's come onto the scene. And the Israelites are literally running the other way, wanting to have nothing to do with this challenger. 25, things take an interesting turn because Saul actually puts out a statement. And he says, he's a king of Israel, so he can say this. He says, I want you to know that whoever can actually defeat this Philistine giant, I'm going to give him two things. I'm going to give him my daughter, and I'm going to give his family exemption from taxes for the rest of their lives in Israel. I got a better response with the adults with that than I do with the kids because they don't get it. 22% don't mean anything to them. Exemption from taxes, and you can have my daughter. And I wonder if that caused the Israelites to begin to be like, maybe I do have what it takes after all. Maybe I am willing to take a shot and risk my life to get Saul's daughter and to get exemption from taxes in Israel. Verse 26, are y'all able to find that back there, Christian? Verse 26 of 1 Samuel 17. David asked the soldiers, watch this. What will a man get for killing this Philistine and ending his defiance in Israel? Then he says, who is this pagan Philistine anyway, that he should defy the armies of the living God? 15 years old, shepherd boy. Who is this? Who is this clown? He's defying the armies of the living God. Here's what that tells me about David. This is awesome. David was not interested in the giant being defeated so that he could get Saul's daughter and exemption from taxes. He didn't even have income yet, probably. He's in it because he wanted to defend the honor of God. The honor of God was on the table. And he's a 15-year-old boy saying, no one defies him. What are y'all doing? Why are we letting him defy the name of the Lord? David ends up actually being brought to King Saul. They're like, hey, he said he'd do it. Saul's like, can you imagine that moment? It's the king of Israel. Him? And then he actually says, it's in verse number, I'll just paraphrase it because I don't want to dig for it. But he actually says, hey, you're a youth? And that man over there, he's been fighting wars since he was in youth. You're just a boy and he's been in combat for 30 years. What do you mean? And then David actually goes on to defend himself. Watch this. And he says, you don't understand, King Saul. You don't get it. You weren't there when I was in the field. And a lion came and took one of my own. And I actually wrestled the lamb out of the lion's mouth, Saul. You weren't there to see it. And then when the lion, he takes it next level. When the lion turned on me, I took the lion by the throat and I clubbed it until it was dead. That's what he says. Go read the story. Then he said there was another time, Saul, where it happened with a bear. The bear took the lamb. I ripped the lamb out of its mouth. The bear turned on me. I grabbed it by its throat and I clubbed it till it was dead. And then he says right here, he says, in the same way that I killed the lion and the bear. And I imagine he stood and faced the valley of Elah. He said, that one's next. He said, right here it is, 36. I've done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too, for he has defied the armies of the living God. What do you think so far? That's awesome right there, right? What a stance to take as a 15-year-old boy. And then the Lord right here, he said in 37, the Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine. Here's what Saul said. All right, have at it. It's yours. But may God be with you. Verse 40, David heads to the stream and he picks up 5 smooth stones. He puts them in his shepherd's bag. Then armed only with his shepherd's staff and his sling, he starts across this valley towards this Philistine. What is Israel thinking at this time? Who is this kid? What do you think the Philistines are thinking at this time? Who is this kid? 41, Goliath walked out toward David. I'm sure he was shocked because for a month and a half he had just walked out into Elah and nobody would come. And now he maybe pulls up his binoculars to see a 5'3" teenager trying to make his way toward him. Goliath walks out toward David. Goliath actually has a shield bearer ahead of him. I don't know why he really needs that. But that's like something you give to somebody, I don't know, like a little brother or something. They're the ones walking out with the shield and Goliath's the one behind. Goliath sneers in contempt at this ruddy-faced boy. 43, am I a dog that you come to me? Because he has a staff. Do you think I'm a dog? Are you going to beat me with a stick? And he cursed David by the names of his gods. 44, come over here. Watch this. This is trash talk to the next level, right? I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. Goliath yelled. Don't use that one. 45, David replied to this Philistine, maybe the most powerful statement in the whole chapter. You come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Leave that right there. The Lord of heaven's armies is the Hebrew word Jehovah Sabaoth. It's the Hebrew name for God that means the God of angel armies, the Lord of heaven's armies. It's used over 250 times in the Old Testament, and each time it's used, it identifies that God is the one who is full of absolute power and absolute might. And so God is saying, you come to me with that little sword that has a 15-inch spearhead on, or a spear that has a 15-inch spearhead on it. You come to me with that little sword of yours. Well, I come to you in the name of Jehovah Sabaoth. And he's full of absolute might, absolute power, and absolute strength. And I hate to break it to you, Goliath, but you're no match for him. You're no match for him. I know my people have been afraid for a long time, but I'm about to show you who's boss. Verse number 46. Today, shout today. Today the Lord will conquer you. This is, he matches his energy in the trash talk here. I'll kill you and cut off your head. Speaking of birds and wild animals, I'll give the dead bodies of your people to them when I'm done with you. And the whole world will know what? That there is a God in Israel. 47, we're coming quickly to a close here. And everyone assembled here will know that the Lord rescues his people, but not with sword and spear. This is the Lord's battle, and he will give you to us. 48, watch this. As Goliath moved closer to attack, what did David do? That joker ran. Watch this. Goliath is 9'9", probably really heavy. Just, I imagine he walks a little bit like this. David, like a little teenage boy, just trots over toward Goliath. Why did he run? I want to suggest that he ran because the faster he could take Goliath's life, the faster that he could restore honor to God and quit this clown from actually mocking him. He was urgent about defending God's honor, and he quickly runs out to meet this Philistine champion. 49, reaching into his shepherd's bag. Here's the story. This is like the climax in Braveheart right here. Reaching into the shepherd's bag, taking out a stone, he hurled it with his sling, and he hit the Philistine where? In the forehead. Precision, baby. You know what I'm talking about? Dead eye right there. The stone sank into his forehead. Goliath stumbled and did what? Fell face down on the ground. Leave it right there if you would. This is incredible. I wrestled with this so long over the years. This is like my favorite story as a kid. But I wrestled with the fact that if a stone, what's the size of a tennis ball, hits someone between the eyes, I would say most everybody is going to fall where? On their back. But Goliath didn't. He fell how? On his face. Watch this. I wonder why. Maybe it's just because he's heavy. Maybe he's 9'9", probably 300 and something pounds. Hit him between the eyes. And so maybe it was enough not to put him on his back, but to just rock him and stumble him until he fell forward. But I thought, there's got to be more than that. I want to suggest to you that Goliath fell on his face because what David was fighting to defend, God got in the end. Watch this. David was fighting to defend what? The honor of God. And here in Goliath's death, we see that although he spent his entire life making a mockery of the name of God, here in his death, we see him face down before him. And what David was fighting to defend, God got in the end. What's the message in that? There are many in this earth that would spend their lives defying God. There are many in the earth that would spend their lives making a mockery of him or just living a lifestyle that's dishonoring to him. The way that the story ends is this. When it's all said and done, God is going to get his honor. He is going to be glorified. And the ones who mock him with their lives will stand before him one day and will see for themselves how marvelous that he is, how victorious that he is, how brilliant that he is, and how glorious that he is. And on that day, Philippians 2 and Matthew 14 both say it. That knee will do what? Will bow, and that tongue will what? Confess that he's the Lord. And it'll be this picture as they see for themselves. And there will be tears of regret pouring from their eyes because once they see him, they will wish they had spent their entire lives honoring him. For those people who honor God with their lives, it'll be a glorious day because we chose the people that gave their lives to Jesus and accepted his gift of salvation because those people chose to honor him with their lives. On Judgment Day, it will be our first response when we see him. It'll be just to honor him face down and to glorify him because we will see fully what we can only see in part now, just how glorious that he is. What do you think? My goodness, man. God will get his honor. He will be glorified. Isn't that good? Verse 50, the story comes to an end with these last 5 verses. David triumphed over the Philistine with only a sling and a stone. He had no sword. 51, David ran over, pulled Goliath's sword from its sheath. David used it to kill him, and he did what he said he would do. He cut the head of this Philistine giant. When the Philistines saw their champion was dead, what did they do? They did what the Israelites were doing earlier. They strapped on their Reeboks and they took off as far as they could go. 52. The men of Israel and Judah gave a great what? A great shout of triumph and rushed after the Philistines, chasing them as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron. The bodies of the dead and wounded Philistines were strewn all along the road from Sharon as far as Gath and Ekron. That's 10 miles. The Philistines were on their heels, and the Israelites were chasing them out of town, knowing that they had won the victory. 53. Then the Israelite army returned and plundered the deserted Philistine camp. What nobody there to defend it anymore. 54, last verse. David took the Philistines' head to Jerusalem, 23 miles, holding Goliath's head. But he stored the man's armor in his own tent. They took it as a spoil, as a reminder, as a trophy to remind the entire region that there indeed is a God in Israel. Oh, what a story, right? Man, what a story. You know, I've thought a lot about this story over the years. My mom, she's here this morning. She actually has a video of me. It was that Bible Man. Y'all remember the old Bible Man stuff right there? There's a David and Goliath episode, and I'm like 3 years old doing like the Goliath thing, and then I would fall on the ground and act like I was dead. And since I was a kid, I've thought through this story and just what it really means. Most people would preach this story this morning and say, man, there's never a giant that's too big for you. We get all excited because, man, we've all got giants in our lives. It's time to face them. Rally cry, right? Let's roll. Some people would say, hey, you're never too young for God to use you. We get all excited because, especially in student ministry, it's like, man, I don't have to be 30 before God can do something through my life. Some people would say that, hey, God's going to use you to do mighty things throughout the entirety of your life, and we get all excited about that. But here's what I think. I think that all three of those teachings fall short of what is really happening here in 1 Samuel 17. I think that the true message of this story is that you and I don't need to put ourselves in David's shoes, because the newsflash is that we're not David. In this story, David actually represents Jesus. Watch this. David is Jesus. Goliath represents the giant that we could not defeat on our own. Goliath represents the giant that was too big for us. He represents the one that we were terrified of, that every time it reared its head, we wanted nothing to do with it but to run the other way. Goliath represents sin and death. So if David is Jesus and Goliath is sin and death, who are we? We're the Israelites up on the hillside that were no match for what we were up against. We were the people of Israel standing there shaking in our boots because of the opposition that we faced. Here's the story. In the same way that David emerged through a crowd as a young boy, as someone who probably wasn't super fierce in strength and stature, in the same way that he came through the crowd when the Israelites were afraid and took on the giant that the people of Israel could not face, so Jesus came forward when we were least expecting him, while we were up against a battle against sin and death that we never could have won. And with one sacrifice, defeated sin and death once and for all. And so now the Israelites up on the hillside, that's me and you, we got to see that thing happen with our own eyes. And now we get the privilege of just lifting up a shout as we see that who has enslaved us and been encroaching on us for so long no longer has dominion over us and cannot defeat us anymore. If I came by to tell you one thing this morning, I came by to tell you that death has been defeated. Somebody get happy with me about that right there. It's awesome. I came by to tell you that sin doesn't have to have dominion over us anymore. I came by to tell you this gospel's better than we give it credit for. It is good news to all of humanity. So what do we do with that, right? We see the story of Jesus played out in the story of David. What do we do with it? Well, we just kind of got to ask ourselves a question this morning, and the question is this: what role did we play in winning the victory? Think about it. In the story of David and Goliath, we're the people of Israel standing on the hillside looking at the valley. What role did they play in the victory? None. And so what do we have to do this morning? We have to accept the fact that Jesus did what we could not do and didn't just leave us right there, but in the same way that David turned back over his shoulder at the hillside and said, "Come on." Israel lifts up a shout. In the same way, when Jesus defeated death and rose from the dead, he looks back at us and invites us to share, watch this, to share in the victory that he purchased. So what do you and I do this morning? We accept the fact that he did it and that we could not.